Imagine you're talking to a 10-year-old. I Googled 10-year-old. To be honest, I think it's a pretty fair representation. But imagine you're talking to one of them, and you say to them, what do you want to be when you grow up? What is your reaction if they were to say a poet, or a graffiti artist, or a street dancer? Now compare that reaction to another 10-year-old who says that when they grow up, they want to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or an accountant. It's as if we've been conditioned to take the answers on the right more seriously than the answers on the left. So why is that? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? The answers on the left, they're not really proper jobs, are they? I mean, who's ever heard of a professional graffiti artist? These are some of the things professional graffiti artists do. They design logos, they create fashion, they do packaging design, they create murals, they create the backdrops for TV commercials. Something really cool called clean graffiti. This is where companies will jet wash your logo into the street, giving you free advertising space. Graffiti art can be your job. Music videos, TV commercials, stage shows, corporate events, filled with professional street dancers. And if you can dance, you can teach dance. You can direct dance, you can film dance, you can light the stage where people dance. Show me a poet, I'll show you an ad man, or a journalist, or a novelist, or a screenwriter, or a songwriter, or a presenter, or a comedian. If you can take words and sentences and put them in a beautiful and interesting and memorable way, you can have a regular income. So why do we still look at that set of answers on the left and see them as being so frivolous compared to the answers on the right? Well, it must be because those answers aren't really so important to society, are they? Well, let's have a look at that. Creative jobs make up about 10% of our workforce, and they bring in £85 billion a year to our economy. It's also been proven that taking part in creative activities make you live longer. They make you more charitable, and they create stronger and safer communities. It's also been proven that kids from low-income backgrounds who take part in creative activities at school are 3 times more likely to get a university degree. So what we seem to have is some sort of imbalance in the way that we judge creative careers compared to academic careers. And I think unless we strongly redress this balance, we're heading for trouble. You may be familiar with this image. Its posh name is the lateralization of brain function, but we know it best as left brain, right brain principle. The left brain looking after our creative, emotional functions, the right our analytical and rational ones. We see it all the time. We use it to label people. We say they're more of a left brain person, they're more of a right brain person, they're all colors and head in the clouds, and they're all brainy and don't like to mess about. But we're quite happy that there's a harmony. We like the fact that there's balance. We wouldn't like to see one without the other. That, for example, is a terrifying proposition. That's a society filled with Picassos and Jimi Hendrixes, which does sound like a lot of fun until you need to arrange a mortgage or get a hip replacement operation, in which case, who knows what you'll end up with. But I think there is something more terrifying, and that's this. And if we're not careful, I think this is where we're heading. The reason for this is because I think we've become obsessed with 2 things: wealth and data. Now, wealth used to be only achievable by being born into the right family, but now it's achievable by literally anyone. And as you can see, it's made the world a much better place. But seriously, we're obsessed with it. There are now 15 million millionaires in the world. And we're not just satisfied with having lots of rich people. We've had to create something else called the super rich, which is only exceeded by my personal favorite kind of wealthy person, the stupid rich. But we're obsessed. We're obsessed with wealth. And as a country that's still coming to terms with a global recession, we've looked across the world and tried to find the countries that are creating the most amounts of wealth, and we've decided to copy them. Countries like China, India, and Brazil especially. The growth in these countries is fantastic. And it's based on industries like manufacturing and export. And you can see this reflected in the way that the education systems run in these countries. The skills needed to make these industries work are maths, literacy, sciences, and language. And so, of course, these are the subjects that are most important to these countries. And for the same reason, so is testing. Now, I love this image. Isn't it incredible? Now, that is an exam going on in China. Not only does it seem like the most important and the biggest exam in the whole world that day, the thing I love about it most is that some poor kid forgot to set his alarm. Can you imagine turning up late to that? That is one epic walk of shame. But this is the same reason why we've become obsessed with data. We can now measure exactly how we compare to the rest of the world in teaching the subjects that appear to generate the most wealth. And we can't really compare ourselves to these countries. I mean, look at that. We don't have the scale. We don't have the resources. So I think we're going about it in the wrong way. So the big question is, how do we grow and support our economy in a different way? Well, I think we need to become less obsessed with things like blindly chasing wealth and constantly monitoring and measuring data. I think we need to become obsessed with the one thing that we can truly be great at, and that's creativity. And in particular, originality in creativity. What makes Britain great is ideas. It's imagination. It's vision, inventiveness. Being able to think outside of the box, not being afraid to break the rules. It's in being incredibly creative, and it's also being incredibly original. To be honest, you can call it what you want. We're bloody brilliant at it. And the thing that I'm most proud of is that when one of our creative lights goes out, the whole world mourns with us. Now, I know you're thinking, you're looking at these pictures and you're going, look, they're unique. These guys were one-offs. But I think that's doing ourselves a disservice. I think in Britain especially, we should be able to be extremely creative. If we look at the countries that we consider to be the most artistic or the most creative or the most inventive, we often think of countries like Italy and France and Spain and Sweden. Have you ever noticed how much access these countries have to coastline? I think there's something fascinating about this. Most countries walk to their borders and look across and see something similar. Similar people, similar buildings, similar landscapes. I think there's something intrinsically creative about a country that can walk to its border and see nothing. The void, the great unknown. I think it forces you to think. I think it forces you to imagine what's out there. We're an island. To be able to think in this way should be programmed into each and every one of us. So how do we start to redress this balance? How do we start to create the conditions for originality? I work in the advertising industry, and I've run and managed creative departments for the last 20 years. Now, it's been my job to try and create these conditions on a daily basis. And of course, there's many different ways of doing it. But as far as I'm concerned, there are 3 key ingredients. The first one is adversity. There must be a challenge. There must be a hurdle. There has to be a problem to try and overcome. All of those people, all those faces that you saw earlier on, every single one of those people had a story of adversity. Without adversity, there's no reason to change. There's no reason to even try. Adversity creates desire. The next one is diversity. There must be variation in the things that influence you. The more open the mind, the more interesting things you can fill it with. You must find and feed your curiosity. Diversity creates passion. And the final one is advocacy. There must be encouragement. There must be the support and the freedom to challenge convention. Advocacy creates belief. When I was 10, our teacher asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I proudly stood up in front of the rest of the class and said, "A Ghostbuster." You can imagine how this went down. I mean, even the other kids found it ridiculous. But I was deadly serious. And I think the reason for this is because I think I was gifted an imagination as a kid. I was born into a low-income, working-class family in Newcastle. There's my dad looking down at me, thinking, what the hell have I just done? But it could be difficult. It was the 1980s. There was 40% unemployment in Newcastle at the time. The landscape was pretty brutal. It was big and it was cold. And I remember lots of people, they didn't really seem that happy. But we were lucky, because we had a cinema at the end of our road. And I would go there every Saturday, often on my own, and for an hour or so, be taken into some fantasy world where anything seemed possible. Saw Ghostbusters 5 times. And every time I would leave that cinema, often in the cold and in the rain, that's when the dreaming would really start. And it made me a curious sort of kid, the kind of kid who would wear a ski jacket with shorts. Hey, it was the 80s. But I was acutely aware of the changes that were happening to Newcastle. We were changing from an industrial town into a modern city. Technology was changing, gadgets were changing, toys were changing, entertainment was changing, the infrastructure of the whole city was changing. When I was 10, Paul Gascoigne made his debut for Newcastle United. The best footballer on the planet was now playing for my home team. And if that was possible, anything was possible, including being a Ghostbuster. There was one person in my life who didn't think I was a complete and utter weirdo, and that was my mother. So there she is, looking proud with her 2 boys. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, there's no chance in hell that those 2 boys would ever end up being doctors or lawyers or accountants. So she must have had to find alternative ways to educate us. I'd like to think there's more to it than that. But nevertheless, that woman went out of her way to buy me books about the paranormal so that I could learn about ghosts. This is the book that she bought me for my 11th birthday. It was always my favorite. She would also buy me art materials so that I could draw up my ghost-busting inventions. And she'd take me serious when I'd ask her questions like, where can I buy material to make an ectoplasm-resistant suit? Okay, so I didn't become a Ghostbuster. But I think that combination of adversity, diversity, and most important, advocacy in my upbringing, I think it kept my imagination alive. And I didn't excel at the academic subjects at school, but the arts were there for me. And interestingly, both myself and my brother ended up going to art college and subsequently into advertising. Now, one of the reasons why I got into advertising was because I really liked the breadth of creative crafts. We look at filmmaking all the time. We look at writing. We look at photography, technology. There's lots of art and design. There's lots of different creative crafts involved. But in the last 20 years, the thing that's really, really inspired me is the diversity of creative talent that we have in our country. Britain is now considered a world leader in fashion, in television, in filmmaking, in music, in theatre, in art, in gaming, in literature, in architecture, in advertising, in design, and in technology. Nowhere in the world will you find such a microcosm of creative originality. This is what makes us unique, and this is what makes us valuable. And yet, if a child says that they want to grow up to be a poet, or a graffiti artist, or a street dancer, or a Ghostbuster, we don't take it seriously. And if you want to grow up to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or an accountant, we do. And here we are in Royal Tunbridge Wells, the heartland of old-fashioned English conservative attitudes. The capital of middle-class academic achievers. Is it? The Tunbridge Wells I know is filled with interesting, open-minded, determined people, with entrepreneurs, with creatives. There are over 500 creative businesses operating in the Tunbridge Wells area. And that got me thinking, why can't we be the ones to lead the way in redressing this balance. I think Tunbridge Wells is uniquely positioned to create the conditions for originality. Now, you may not associate Tunbridge Wells with the word adversity, but then adversity to the young is not a matter of geography. Imagine being born 10 years ago. You're about to be thrust into a world of financial collapse, irreversible environmental damage, international terrorism, and a digital age that will drown you with information and deprive you of your privacy. And not only that, you didn't create any of these problems, but the people who did are looking to you to figure out a way to fix them. If you add to that the pressure we put our kids under for academic success, with things like the 11 plus and all the standardized testing that's coming in. My little girl's 10, and I've heard kids at school talking about if they don't get a grammar school education, they won't grow up to get a good job. Do not worry about adversity in the young. It is now inherent. You may not consider Tunbridge Wells to be particularly diverse either, but diversity isn't something that should come to you. From this very spot, you can be in London, arguably the world's most culturally diverse city, in less than an hour. And once there, you've got access to some of the world's best art galleries and museums, and most of them are free to enter. But unlike living in London, within 10 minutes, you can be sitting in a field in perfect silence and being able to look up at the night sky and actually see stars. You must find and feed your curiosity. Diversity is about access, and we've got so much of it. And the final one, and arguably the most important one, is advocacy. Over to you. Thank you very much.